So today is lesson 9. So we're going to look at scrolling components. We're also going to look at some navigation. These are probably things you're going to want both of these things in your project. Just a reminder that assignment 2 is due next week. So Tuesday at 5 o'clock before class. So it doesn't need to be the completed app, but there needs to be some working functionality, some ability to register, log in, create, and read data. So that has to be submitted by next Tuesday. So depending on how our time goes today in terms of doing scrolling and navigation, the other thing I would like to do if we have time is come around the class and get an update. I would like to see where everybody's project is at before we go. We may or may not have time for that. We probably will, so I'm hoping to get a sense of where everybody's application is at. And during that time, you can be working on the project while I'm going to get updates from other people in the group, in the class. Okay, so I'm going to open up our project. So I'm going to launch my emulator, just get our project up and running. And the first thing we want to look at doing is we want to look at how would we add a component. Let's say we want to add a text component where a user can scroll through it. Okay, so it only takes up a certain fixed size on the, rather than taking up our entire window, we can fix the size of it, but allow a user to scroll through the content within that fixed area size. So I think what we'll do, so we've set our register activity as our main. Let's say we want to have something on here. Let's say we need some legal text like a terms and conditions, which is usually very long. If we put the whole thing in a text view, that text view is going to take the entire, it's going to take up the entire display. We're not going to even see the buttons. The user would have to manually scroll up in order to see the buttons. What I want to do is put on the terms and conditions, but put it in like a fixed area that a user just scrolls, but that area, we've set the height of it so we can still see our buttons. So we're going to throw a text view on here, and then I've got like a template for terms and conditions. We're going to populate that and look at how do we set the scrolling. Because there's a good chance when you're building your app, you're going to need to fix the size of certain things and allow users to scroll through them without having them take up the entire visible area of the screen. So I'm going to open up, actually, I'll just close a bunch of stuff up here for now. I'll just keep my sign-in activity. And I also want to open up our activity sign-in layout file. So in resources, layout. So in here, I want to put a text view, but I want to limit the size of it and allow a user to scroll through it. So let's add a text view. Now, rather than actually setting a fixed height, we'll still set the height and width to wrap the content, but what we'll do is we'll set this property called max lines. Max lines does what you probably assume it does, which would be what? Yeah, how many lines of text vertically will it display at once? So let's set that to 10. So if we've got 100 lines of text, it's only going to be tall enough to display 10 of those at a time. We'll add what option do you think we want here for scroll bars? yeah, let's add vertical scrolling. So they're not going to need to scroll across, but they're going to need to be able to scroll up and down. We'll constrain this left and right. And maybe not the ideal place to put it. I'll put it above my. I have to think about where this constraint's going to go. Let's see, because we're injecting our UI. All right, for the moment, I'll just put it at the bottom of the screen. We'll see if that pushes our Google UI up above it. We may have to move it around a little bit. I haven't given it an ID. So we'll call it text view terms. Okay. We'll leave it there for a minute. And then we'll populate it with a string resource. So at the moment, I guess I could just hard code some text in. So we'll replace this. We'll create a string resource, and I've got a boilerplate kind of terms and conditions that's more than 10 lines, so we can see what it will look like for the user to scroll through it. So we'll replace this in a minute, but I'll just run the app. We'll see where this shows up. We may have to adjust the layout constraints a little bit. Actually, while this is running, if you want to go to Blackboard in lesson 9, there's a text file here that I got from samplestore.com. It is a sample terms of use for a mobile application, which they allow us to use as a boilerplate. So open up this file and just copy all the content. And we're going to take this and create a string resource called terms, and this will be the value. And then our little text view can display this instead. Blackboard, lesson 9, sample terms and conditions string. There's a link in there. It'll open a text file. So just copy it. Okay. That's interesting. We don't even see our... Why didn't we see our text view? Maybe I'm going to have to move this. I'll put in the top constraint as well. And then I'll finish creating my string resource in a minute. I just want to see our that our text view shows up here somewhere. Oh, it's there, and then the Android UI wipes it out. It showed up, and then it disappeared. Okay, so for our purposes, the Android UI is messing with what I want to do, so we're going to put this on another page, just for now. There's probably a way we could make this smaller. Let me think about it for a minute. If not, we can just put this on another page. Okay, I don't want to fight with the Android UI. Okay. Well, I'll create my string resource. I'm going to move this to another file just so we can see how it works. But I've already got my clipboard, has already got my terms and conditions. So I'll open up strings.xml. I'll create a string called terms, and then I'll paste in the full contents of that text document. So let's see. Oh, we can put this on the profile activity. So I'm going to open up my activity profile XML. And I'll just move this. I'll just move the terms and conditions. I'll take it out of my sign-in activity. And I'll put it underneath my text view email. So I'll put my top is actually to the bottom of. I think that'll be okay there. So in order to see this, I'm going to need to sign in. Because to get to the profile activity, you have to go start on the sign-in activity, log into the site, and then we can navigate to the profile. So I just moved it out of my sign-in into my profile and anchored it below the email. We'll try that. I'm sure there's a way we can customize the Android UI so it takes up a smaller window and we can fit it on here. But in terms of seeing how the scrolling works, we will skip that for now. And actually, I guess I can change now that we have our, now that we've got our terms and conditions text, we could change the hard-coded text to use the string resource. So it should put that whole block of text in our text view. So I just changed line 37 here. I took out the hard-coded string. I put in our string resource. So I'll sign in with, doesn't matter if I sign in with an email account or Google. So if I go to my profile, we've got the terms and conditions, but notice you only see the first 10 lines. So right now, there's no way to actually see the rest of the text because we've constrained the height of this to only display 10 lines at a time. So if we want to make this scrollable, we actually do this in the back end through Kotlin. We just need to call a method to basically enable vertical scrolling. So in my profile activity, in onCreate, so I want to enable scrolling on the terms text view, since it only shows 10 lines at a time. So what we want to do is set the movement method. And we set that to a new instance of so there's a scrolling movement method class which doesn't get recognized. So giving Alt-Enter is going to make a reference to android.text.method.scrolling movement method. So I'll just hit Alt-Enter. It gives me this import. And if we run it again, we now should be able to click in that text view and scroll up and down. So now if I click anywhere in my text view, I can click and drag, or if you're on a real device, you can simply scroll with your finger. So you can see the little scroll window as you move on the right. Now you may or may not have use for this in your assignment, just depends on the content you have and on the UI. But this is should be fairly straightforward in terms of how you would make something a fixed height and allow that a fixed height or fixed width and allow a user to scroll across it without that element getting resized or having to size fully to display all the content at once. So in your element, you can set scroll bars as being so you've got horizontal, none, and vertical. None will be the default. And it's pretty rare we scroll horizontally on mobile apps, not very often. We tend to scroll vertically more, but you have the option if for some reason you want users to be able to scroll horizontally, they can. And then in your code, you just need to enable the movement method with the import. So not very complicated, but something you might need in your assignment. Now you know how to do it. Anybody have any questions? You're having problems getting your scrolling to work? Okay, I didn't figure we would need a heck of a lot of time for that. We do need some more time for this. We're talking about how to set up navigation. So I haven't really defined how you have to do this in your assignment because you got lots of options. So we'll look at a few of the options and you can use any option that you think makes sense. Excuse me. So Android offers a whole bunch of different components. They all kind of follow their own material design guidelines. And the guidelines, they suggest some rules. You don't have to follow them, but they suggest kind of typical user flow and style that people are used to when it comes to their Android apps. So this is probably the most common type of navigation. This is what we're going to work with today, which is the app bar. So the app bar is like a toolbar that basically sits at the top of your activities. And we've got different things we can do. We can create this kind of like hamburger style menu. We get the ability to put static text like a title. We can put icons, and then we've got this special icon that drops open, for example, a submenu. This is what we're going to work with. There's one kind of gotcha with this. For a long time, there's two versions of this. The original version was part of Android's, it was a version 7 compatibility library. So if you look for tools and tricks and how to use the toolbar, 90% of what you're going to see is using that version. However, that version's kind of old. And in fact, even the official Android docs, if you look at the toolbar, it still gives you the old version. We're actually going to use a newer version of this that's part of the Android X UI library. So it's newer, but if we go and look at the official docs, which I have here, if you go and look for toolbar, I put this link up. This is the app. This is the official docs. When we go here, it actually describes how to use the old version. So this is describing using the version 7 app compatibility library. So this version will work if you're targeting older versions of Android. They'll all support this. So when you go into user interface and app bar, it still tells you how to use this version. For the newer version, all they do is they give you the official docs, but there's actually no description of how to use this at all, even though this is the newer version. You can read the properties, methods, and events, but there's no sample of how you include it, which is kind of crazy to me. So we'll go through how we would include it. If you want, you can use the old one, but it means you have to add some different dependencies. And part of the reason we're going to use the new one, I'm not going to add it in yet, but if we just see, if you actually go into Android Studio, in Legacy, the toolbar isn't even here anymore. That version 7 toolbar isn't even here. Sorry. Where is it? But if we go to container now, and we want a toolbar, this is giving us the new version. Yeah, this is from the Android X UI library. So to me, it's kind of crazy that Android Studio gives us this one, yet the Android developer docs don't actually tell us how to use it. They only describe, they give us the official documentation, but there's no description of how to work with it. And most tutorials, if you search Android toolbar, it describes the version 7 compatible one, the old one. So we are going to use the toolbar. We'll fight with it a little bit, but we should be able to get it to work. So that's probably our most popular option. So, looks kind of like this. Most of you have Android devices, so you're pretty familiar with kind of the look and functionality. There are some other nav options. So this one's called the Nav Drawer. So it's basically a pop-out menu that slides in from the left side. This is a little more common with tablets. So some of our apps might have an app bar on a phone, but yet it might have an alternate layout where it's using the navigation bar on a tablet, just because the tablet has the real estate to show it. You don't typically see this on a lot of layouts for phone because there's just not enough room. You open up the navigation, you can't see anything else. This is not wide enough. Okay. We do also see some bottom navigation. Actually, one student project, I can pull it up, let's see, in the Play Store, let's see. I think they use this one. I think they use the bottom. You can maybe even see a screenshot of it. Yeah, so this app's been built by a bunch of web and programmer students. So they're using the bottom nav with the icons are here. So there's no app bar as a user navigates around. There's nothing at this instead. So that's an option. There's also a tabbed navigation, so a little more of a web style nav bar. So there's a control for this as well. So in your assignment, you're free to do whatever you like. You've got all of these available. These all come in Android Studio. We'll look at using the Android X toolbar for today. So typically in the app bar, there's going to be, there's often, you know, like a name and maybe a logo for our app would be here. We might do something like, for example, if we've got location services on, it might show in the app bar. And then kind of general functionality, things like search and settings are here. So this app bar kind of has both. We've got the regular app bar, and then we've got tabs below. In order to use it, all of our activities must extend the app compat activity class, which they do by default. If you open up any of the Kotlin files, any of the activities in the project we have, automatically Android Studio has this inheritance. So we should be fine. This is a bit of a weird one. One thing we're going to have to do is make a change in our manifest. There is actually a native action bar that comes by default with our project, and we can't use that and our own toolbar at the same time. So we are basically we're setting the theme to not use this default action bar because we want to create our own toolbar and use that instead. So that app bar is there by default. We basically want our theme to disable it. Otherwise, excuse me, our app's going to try and display two different toolbars in the same spot. So we'll want to make this change in our manifest. Yep. Yep.
But in the children activities, I'm using the default one because in the default one I can set up menu items like easily. I can set up the back button just there is some activities in the manifest.
Okay, sure, we can try it that way. You can do both. You can either disable it globally. If you're going to use it, yes, if you're going to use the default one and you only want your own toolbar in certain parts of the app, then you don't have to disable it through the manifest. So our toolbar object is going to look something like this. If we drag that toolbar that's in the toolbox on, it's going to give us a toolbar of from the Android X library. So this is also going to involve some imports in order to make this work. And typically we're going to constrain it obviously to the top of our activity. And then to instantiate it, to add it, we just call set support action bar, and that adds the toolbar to any activity. It is possible to add it globally, to build the toolbar globally. We don't want the toolbar on every page. For example, on our sign-in page, we don't want the toolbar that has, for example, links to the other activities. They usually got to first register and log in before they get the toolbar. So we will just include this on our main activity and our profile activity for now. We won't include it everywhere. And then in terms of defining what goes in the toolbar, we can set up a menu XML file. So we have a menu node, and then we create individual items where those items might be text. We can use the material icons if we would rather use images. So we set up our menu. And then we need to call this method. We need to override the onCreate options. This actually inflates the menu, basically attaches the menu to our toolbar. And then the last thing we have to do is override and put in description of what happens when each menu item is clicked. So we'll override the item selected, we'll identify which item was clicked, and we'll do something. For example, go to another activity, launch an explicit intent to open another app, exit, do something else. And so this is the process that we'll need to go through. But Vlad had a good point. There's, this is the way I've laid it out is certainly not the only way you could do it. Depends on the needs of your app. And we may have different toolbars. I guess, especially the bigger our app is, the more likely it is we may have different toolbars for different areas of it, or even based on different users. We'll have different options in their toolbar. Okay, so that's an overview of what we're going to do. I'm kind of hopeful that we should be able by 10 o'clock to have this toolbar up and running and implemented. Shouldn't be that much work, and then that'll give us a bit of time for me to get an update on everyone's assignment, and the rest of the time you can actually work while you're here. If there is time, you can make some progress because it is due next week. All right, let's take a break here.